This is a revision video about Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnet, Sonnet 43. I would recommend that during the course of this revision video that you have a printed copy of the sonnet, and that it might be helpful to make some notes or some annotations along with what I'm saying. As with any poem, I'd suggest there are 1, 2, 3 questions that you need to ask yourself when you start to read it. The first question would be to think about the content of the poem, so to give it a read and to think about what it's about and what happens in the poem. Secondly, I'd suggest that you think about the speaker and what they're feeling. And finally, I would go through the poem with a highlighter, and I would highlight any so-called iceberg words. By that I mean words with more meaning under the surface, and any poetic devices, or simply any words that you think could be useful. So a little bit of background to the poem. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was born in 1806. She was the daughter of a plantation owner, which would have been something that employed slaves, although she was really strongly opposed to slavery herself. Her father was a bit of a tyrant. He opposed his children getting married, and he was strongly opposed to Elizabeth getting married as well. And she lived at home. Her health sort of deteriorated as she got older, but she was very, very highly educated and self-educated. You'd think she was very, very well read, very academic, and a very, very prolific writer. She lived at home, she wrote a lot, and her work caught the attention of a man called Robert Browning. They began a relationship, and over the course of 20 months they exchanged an astonishing 600 letters between them, which shows you sort of the passion and commitment of their relationship. Her father strongly opposed the match, forbid her to marry him. They eloped, which means that they wed in secret. They went away to get married, and unfortunately her father never spoke to her again. So that might add a little bit to your understanding of Sonnet 43, which is really, we would think, dedicated to Robert Browning. A little bit about love as it was presented in the 1800s, when Elizabeth Barrett Browning was writing. Previously to the 1800s, marriages had just been seen as something that was functional. It was something to do with stability, with money, with status, with social status, social standing, and it wasn't necessary really to marry for love. And that's when the idea first came in to popularity, the 1800s. So the idea of love in the 1800s included 5 beliefs, which we would think are quite common today. The idea of love at first sight, that everyone has a so-called true love, love conquers all, that the beloved is nearly perfect. I'm not too sure about that one. And one should marry for love. We would certainly agree with that one, that really you're going to marry for love. And that became a really popular idea from around about 1740 to 1865. It was a popular idea in magazines, publications of the day, this idea of people being encouraged to marry for love above all else. So let's have a look at the poem. Now you see that I've highlighted some important parts of the poem on my sort of third reading of the poem, and these are the things that I would probably think about writing about if I was going to write about Sonnet 43. So first of all, we've got the idea of what's called an implied listener. It's almost like we've started or we've stumbled upon a conversation. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. As if the person who she's speaking to has said, how do you love me? And she said, how do I love thee? And she's responding to him. Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. Now look at these dimensions that she uses. She's trying to, in a sense, we would say, quantify her love with these ideas, the depth and breadth and height. So she's trying to show how big her love is, but then she goes on to a more spiritual level. She says, the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. So this isn't a practical, everyday love. This is a very spiritual love. And that's the whole idea of Browning's poem, that love is something that's beyond the material world, that it's something almost spiritual, everlasting, intangible. You can't touch it. It's beyond our understanding. When feeling out of sight, and again the idea of being out, something out of this world, something beyond human comprehension and understanding, out the idea of it being out of sight, for the ends of being and ideal grace. I love thee. Look at this repetition. So we've got our techniques so far. We've got an implied listener. We've got the language of sort of religion, spirituality. We've got repetition. I love thee. I love thee. I love thee. That urgency, that commitment with the repetition of that phrase. It's very forceful in a way. It's almost like she's trying to convince him. To the level of every day's most quiet need. So, to the level of every day's most quiet need means that she needs him in the same way that you would need water, the same way that you need air, the same way that you need light, the same way that we need anything, our most basic fundamental needs as a person. That's what he is to her. By sun and candle light. And here she's trying to say, like she was saying, she was trying to measure that love before. Now she's saying that her love is everything, that his love is everything to her on a daily basis. All she needs, from sun, from the sort of day, until candlelight, until night. So it sort of envelops her whole day. I love thee freely, and that's an important word. I love thee freely. So the idea that it almost linking back to the idea there that she's been trapped by perhaps her father's rule, and there's a sense of freedom in the love that she feels for her partner. As men strive for right. Now that's a contextual line there in a sense, because Browning was an intensely religious person as well, and the idea of she loves him in the same way that men would strive for sort of moral goodness. The idea that in the same way that men would strive to live a good life, which is would have been really an ideal at that time. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. So the idea that she loves him purely, that her love is pure, it's innocent. The idea of perfection coming in here. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs. And there you get a sense of her past sadness and her past traumas and her griefs and her sadnesses that she's been through. She's saying she loves him with the intensity with which she has maybe mourned, with the intensity with which she has had sadness in her life. It's a similar feeling. And she loves him with my childhood's faith. And she's almost saying there that she loves him like she's a child, with that sort of innocent naivety and innocent trust in him as well, which is kind of a nice image. I love thee with a love I seemed to lose with my lost saints. She's almost saying there that you've got that religious language, faith and saints. The idea there that she had some sort of spiritual crisis in her past, but that loving him has sort of reconnected her with her spirituality. So all of this poem is all about a connection, a spiritual connection, not just an emotional or a physical connection. It's beyond that. I love thee with the breath, smiles, look at this listing, tears of all my life. So she's becoming more urgent here. And you can tell with the punctuation, the fact that she's listing now physical things of herself that she connects with him. It's becoming much more urgent. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. So the idea there, it's become even more dramatic at the end of the poem. So she starts by trying to quantify it with sighs, the size of her love. But at the end, her love goes beyond life into death. It's like an eternal love. So if you think about the structure of the poem, you've got a 14-line poem, which is called a sonnet. It's a very strict way of structuring a poem. It's written in what's called iambic pentameter. So you can count, there's a set of 10 syllables per line. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. And that follows all the way through, just about. The fact that she's got such a strict rhyme scheme and strict way of rhythmically structuring the poem as well with the iambic pentameter. Perhaps that links with the idea of perfection, unity, the idea of her love and her union with this person being something pure. She does talk about the idea of purity here. So it could possibly link with that. Okay, so finally, what I'd say about Sonnet 43 is that it's important that you think about how Elizabeth Barrett Browning presents the idea of love and commitment. It's very different to some of the other poems about love and relationships in the anthology, particularly the more modern poems. So think about, from a 19th century perspective, what she's saying about love in those times, how it's different. And it's a lot of what she's saying is the idea of it being very connected with spirituality and religion. And think about how you could compare it with some of the other poems.